How many pounds of venison have you thrown away over the years because of how you butchered the deer, not because of where you shot it? The answer for most hunters is more than they want to admit. I have processed over 60 deer in 28 years of hunting, and I ruined meat on at least the first 20 because nobody taught me the difference between getting meat off a deer and getting good meat off a deer. Those are two completely different skills. The first one requires a knife. The second one requires an understanding of what you are cutting, why each cut matters, and what mistakes turn 80 pounds of premium protein into 40 pounds of freezer filler that your family would rather eat chicken than look at. Every step in this video follows the order I use on every deer I process now, from the moment I hang the carcass to the moment the last package goes into the vacuum sealer. I learned most of this by making expensive mistakes and a few critical pieces from a buddy who processes deer commercially in southern Iowa and has put his hands on over 300 carcasses. Stay until the end, because there is one finishing step that most home processors skip entirely that turns good venison into the best venison you have ever eaten, and it costs you nothing but 5 extra minutes per quarter. The first decision that matters happens before you ever touch a knife, and it is whether to hang the deer and let it age or process it immediately. If your overnight temperatures are between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that water is close to freezing but the carcass does not freeze solid, you should hang that deer for 5 to 7 days minimum in a ventilated shed, garage, or barn before processing. This is dry aging, and it is the single biggest quality difference between venison that tastes like steak and venison that tastes like liver. During those 5 to 7 days, the muscle's own enzymes break down connective tissue and tenderize the meat from the inside out. The surface of the carcass dries and forms a hard crust called a pellicle that acts as a natural barrier against bacteria while the interior stays moist and ages perfectly. Commercial beef is aged 14 to 28 days in a controlled cooler. Your deer hung in a barn for a week is getting the same enzymatic process at the same temperature range for a shorter duration, and even that shorter duration produces a noticeable difference in tenderness and flavor that fresh processed venison cannot match. I did a side-by-side comparison on a farm in southern Iowa 2 seasons ago. 2 does shot the same evening, 1 processed the next morning, the other hung for 8 days at temperatures between 30 and 44 degrees. Cooked backstrap medallions from both in the same cast iron skillet with salt and pepper, nothing else. The fresh processed backstrap was fine, normal venison. The aged backstrap was tender enough to cut with a fork and had a richness I cannot describe except to say it tasted like the best ribeye I have ever had. Same deer species, same field, same cook, different aging. My wife, who is patient about most of my hunting projects, but particular about what goes on the dinner table, said it was the best venison she had ever tasted. She has been eating my deer for 22 years. That one comment convinced me to hang every cold weather deer from that point forward. If my wife notices the difference without being told there was a test, the difference is real. If your temperatures are above 50 degrees, which happens regularly during early bow season across the South and Midwest, do not hang the deer. Process it immediately. Bacterial growth above 50 degrees will spoil the meat faster than the enzymes can improve it. In warm weather, you gut the deer, skin it, quarter it, and get it into a cooler with ice or a refrigerator within 2 to 3 hours of the kill. The aging window is a cold weather luxury. It is not available to everyone. If you hunt in Black Belt, Alabama, in October, you are processing same day, period. Same principle from the venison preservation video. Temperature dictates everything. If you are between those extremes, say 45 to 55 degrees during the day and 30 seconds at night, you can still hang for 2 to 3 days. The cool nights buy you time, but check the carcass surface every morning. If it feels tacky or sticky instead of dry, the bacterial growth is outpacing the aging, and you need to cut it down and process immediately. The second step is removing the hide, and the timing matters more than people think. You want the hide off within 24 hours of the kill, regardless of temperature. In warm weather, get it off within 2 hours. The hide holds body heat against the meat like a blanket and keeps the carcass core temperature high long after the animal is dead. A deer left in the back of a truck with the hide on for 6 hours in 5-degree air will have a core temperature above 70 degrees, which is deep into the bacterial growth zone. I have watched guys drive to camp with a deer in the bed, eat lunch, swap stories for an hour, and then start skinning at 3 p.m. That deer has been cooking in its own hide for 5 hours. The backstraps are already compromised. Get the hide off first. Everything else can wait. I made this mistake on a buck I shot in the Adirondacks during an early November warm spell. Temperatures hit 58 degrees that afternoon, and I left the hide on for 4 hours while I helped a buddy track his deer. By the time I got back to skin it, the inside of the hams had a sour smell that no amount of trimming fixed. I salvaged the backstraps and tenderloins, but lost both hindquarters. 20 pounds of meat gone because I did not prioritize the hide. That one deer taught me more about processing priorities than 10 YouTube videos ever did. Everything in this video, plus 60 more field-tested techniques, is in the Buck Hunter's Bible. 90 pages of deer behavior science, scent control, scouting methods, stand placement, and rut phase tactics with a quick reference card you can take to the stand. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. The actual butchering starts with the tenderloins, and this is where most home processors make their first big mistake. The tenderloins are two small cylindrical muscles located on the inside of the body cavity, running along both sides of the spine and the lower back, roughly the size and shape of a large banana each. They are the most tender cut on the entire animal, and most hunters either leave them inside the carcass during gutting and let them dry out for days, or they cut them out so roughly that they end up as two mangled scraps instead of two perfect fillets. You want to remove the tenderloins within a few hours of gutting. They are thin enough that they dry out and develop a hard crust faster than any other cut on the carcass. Reach inside the body cavity, find the spine, and run your fingers along it until you feel the two soft cylindrical muscles lying against the vertebrae. Slide your knife blade along the spine with the edge facing out, away from the bone, and peel the tenderloin away from the backbone in one continuous motion. Do not saw at it. One long, smooth cut. Then trim the thin membrane off the outside. A sharp Havalon replaceable blade makes this faster than any fixed blade because the surgical sharpness lets you separate the membrane without cutting into the meat underneath. I did this with a dull knife on my first 10 deer and wasted half the tenderloin every time trying to peel that membrane with a blade that was tearing instead of cutting. A sharp knife is not a preference in deer processing. It is a requirement. A dull blade tears muscle fibers, exposes more surface area to air, and creates rough surfaces that dry out faster in the freezer. I keep a Winchester diamond sharpening steel on the table and touch up the edge every 10 to 15 minutes during processing. Some guys use a Havalon and swap blades every 20 minutes. Either approach works. What does not work is grinding through a whole deer with a blade that stopped being sharp after the first shoulder. The front shoulders come off next, and this is the cut that separates a real butcher from a guy with a knife. The front shoulder on a whitetail is not attached to the skeleton by any bone joint. It is held on entirely by muscle and connective tissue. There is no ball and socket. There is no pin joint. It is floating, which means you do not need a saw. You need a knife and some pulling. Start by lifting the front leg away from the body to expose the seam where the shoulder meets the rib cage. Cut along that seam. Pull the leg outward as you cut, and the shoulder will peel away from the body naturally. The knife tells you where to go if you let it follow the connective tissue instead of trying to force a path through muscle. On a freshly killed deer that is still warm, the front shoulder comes off in about 60 seconds. On a cold-aged deer, it takes a little more muscle because the connective tissue is stiffened, but the process is the same. Once the shoulder is off, you will see a large, flat muscle on the outside of the shoulder blade called the infraspinatus. Cut along the spine of the shoulder blade, which is the bony ridge that runs across the middle, and you will find a flat cut about the size of a paperback book on each side. That is the flat iron steak. Most guys grind the entire front shoulder into burger and miss two of the best steaks on the animal. A buddy who runs a small processing operation near the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri showed me this cut 5 years ago, and I have pulled flat irons out of every front shoulder since. They are not as tender as backstrap, but pan-seared in butter for 3 minutes per side, they are far better than the grind pile they usually end up in. 2 flat iron steaks per deer, roughly 6 to 8 ounces each, about the size of a deck of cards. That is 2 dinners you are throwing into the grinder because nobody told you they were there. The backstraps are the crown jewels, and the one rule you cannot break is to take your time. The backstraps are two long muscles that run along the outside of the spine from the hip to the base of the neck, roughly 14 to 18 inches long on a mature deer, about the length of your forearm and hand. Start at the hip end. Make a vertical cut straight down to the spine. Then turn your blade and follow the spine forward, keeping the edge tight against the bone, peeling the meat away as you go. The vertebrae have small bony protrusions called spinous processes that stick up along the top of the spine. Most home processors run their knife straight along the spine and leave 2 to 3 ounces of meat on each of those protrusions because they cut above them instead of around them. Take your time around each one. An outdoor edge swing blade or any knife with a thin flexible blade lets you curve around those protrusions and capture every ounce of meat. On two backstraps, the difference between cutting above the protrusions and cutting around them is roughly 4 to 6 ounces of the best meat on the animal. That does not sound like much until you realize it is 2 full servings you are leaving on the bone because you were in a rush. I timed myself on the last deer I processed. Taking my time around the spinous processes added about 4 minutes per backstrap compared to just running the blade straight. 8 minutes of extra work for 6 ounces of the best meat on the animal. That math works for me every single time. The hind quarters are where the bulk of your meat lives, and this is where understanding anatomy saves you from turning 25 pounds of roasts and steaks into 25 pounds of ground burger. Each hind quarter contains 3 main muscle groups separated by seams of silver skin and connective tissue. The top round is the largest, a thick slab of lean muscle on the outer side of the leg. The bottom round is underneath it, and the sirloin tip is on the front of the thigh, closest to the belly. If you just start hacking at the hind quarter with no plan, you will cut across all 3 muscle groups and end up with irregular chunks that cook unevenly and have silver skin running through the middle of every piece. The correct approach is to seam butcher, which means finding the natural separations between muscle groups and cutting along those seams rather than across the muscle. Those seams are visible as thin white lines of silver skin and connective tissue running between the muscles. Follow the seam with your knife tip, and the muscles peel apart cleanly into individual roasts that are pure meat with silver skin only on the outside where it can be trimmed away. I did not learn this until my 15th or 16th deer, because every butchering video I watched as a younger hunter just showed someone hacking a hind quarter into chunks. It looked fast and efficient, but the results in the kitchen were terrible. Chunks with silver skin through the center. Pieces that were half one muscle and half another, with different grain directions that cooked at different speeds. My wife finally told me that the venison roast I was so proud of was like chewing a boot, and that was the week I called the buddy in Iowa and asked him to teach me to do it correctly. He spent an entire Saturday afternoon walking me through a dough on his processing table, and by the end of it I understood that the difference between a good home butcher and a bad one is not talent or experience. It is knowing where the seams are. Once you can see the seams, the knife just follows them. The anatomy does the work. The silver skin removal is where home processors lose the most meat unnecessarily. Silver skin is the thin, translucent membrane, sometimes with a bluish or silvery sheen, that covers the outside of every major muscle group. It does not break down during cooking. It shrinks, which causes the meat to curl and cook unevenly, and it has a tough, chewy texture that ruins the eating experience. You must remove it. But you do not need to remove every trace of it at the cost of half the meat underneath. Slide your knife under the silver skin at one end of the muscle, angling the blade slightly upward so the cutting edge is pressed against the skin rather than into the meat. Then pull the silver skin taut with your offhand while you push the blade forward in long, smooth strokes. The blade should be almost flat against the meat surface. If you are cutting into pink meat, your angle is too steep. Flatten the blade. I wasted an embarrassing amount of good venison learning this. My early attempts at silver skin removal looked like I had attacked the meat with a cheese grater. A sharp knife and a flat angle are the entire technique. I still lose a little meat on the first pass sometimes, especially on the hind quarters where the silver skin wraps around the curve of the muscle. But the difference between my early attempts and what I do now is probably 3 to 4 ounces per quarter. Over a whole deer, that adds up to nearly a pound of meat saved just by improving one knife angle. The trim and scrap cuts are the most wasted category of meat in home processing, and this bothers me more than any other mistake on this list. The neck meat, The rib meat between each bone, the flank, the brisket, the shanks, and all the trim pieces from cleaning up your roasts and steaks. Most hunters either throw this away or grind it all into burger without a second thought. Those scraps represent 15 to 20 pounds of usable protein on an average doe, roughly the weight of a large bag of dog food. The neck is one of the best slow-cook roasts on the animal if you leave it intact and braise it for 3 to 4 hours at low heat. The shanks are osso buco. The flank is excellent for jerky. Look, everything I am walking through here is in the Buck Hunter's Bible. 90 pages, scent control, scouting, stand placement, rut tactics, plus a quick reference card for the stand. Link in the description, QR code on screen. One critical thing on all trim work. Anywhere you see large pockets of fat clustered together, especially around the base of the legs and near the groin, there are glands embedded in that fat. Do not cut through them with your knife, because the gland material will contaminate the blade and spread a bitter, musky flavor to everything you cut afterward. Cut around the fat pockets. Discard them whole. And if you accidentally nick a gland, wash your blade with hot water before you touch any more meat. I learned this the hard way on a buck in Black Belt, Alabama, when I sliced through a gland near the ham and then used the same knife on the backstrap without cleaning it. The backstrap tasted like it had been soaked in musk. One gland, one cut, one ruined meal. And the trim pieces are perfect for pressure canning, which I covered in the venison preservation video, where they become shelf-stable, ready-to-eat protein that lasts 18 to 24 months without a freezer. I processed a doe in the Adirondacks last November and tracked every ounce. The total hanging weight was 98 pounds. The boneless yield after careful seam butchering was 52 pounds. If I had processed the same deer the way I did it 20 years ago, cutting fast, ignoring the flat irons, leaving meat on the spine, grinding everything that was not a backstrap or hind quarter, the yield would have been closer to 35 pounds, 17 pounds of difference from the same animal. That is 34 meals. Think about that for a second. 34 meals from the same animal that most hunters would yield 20 fewer meals from. The deer did not change. The knife skills did. The step I promised at the beginning, the one that most home processors skip, is the final trim and dry. After every roast and steak is cut and every muscle is separated, most guys go straight to the vacuum sealer or the freezer wrap. That is the wrong move. Before you package anything, lay all of your finished cuts on a clean wire rack over a sheet pan and put them uncovered in the refrigerator for 4 to 6 hours. This final dry period does 2 things. First, it pulls surface moisture off the meat, which prevents ice crystal formation inside the vacuum bag that causes freezer burn over time. A wet piece of meat sealed in a bag will develop frost crystals within weeks. A surface-dried piece sealed in the same bag will look perfect 6 months later. Second, the cold air firms up the surface of the meat, making it easier to get a tight vacuum seal without the bag pulling moisture out of the cut and creating a blood puddle in the package. 5 minutes of active work, 4 hours of waiting, and the difference in your freezer quality 6 months from now is the difference between venison your family asks for and venison your family avoids. Your next deer is a chance to do every step right. Take your time. Let the knife follow the seams. Age the carcass if the weather allows it. Save the scraps. Dry the cuts before you seal them. And treat every pound like what it is, which is the reason you spent 200 hours in a stand, 50 hours scouting, and more money on gear than your wife thinks you did. That animal gave you everything. The least you can do is not waste it on the cutting table. The next time you are standing over a deer with a knife in your hand, remember that the animal on that table ran 35 miles an hour, cleared 8-foot fences, detected your scent from 100 yards, and survived every predator in its ecosystem for 3 or 4 years before you outsmarted it for 10 seconds. It deserves to be processed with the same care that went into hunting it. Take your time. The meat is worth it. Your family is worth it. And the deer was worth it.